The baby monitor whispered with static, the only sound in the dim living room where Lila dozed on the couch. Her newborn daughter, Grace, curled against her chest, rose and fell with each breath. Outside, snow sifted quietly, frosting the windows in delicate patterns. Daniel moved through the room with practiced care, draping a blanket over mother and child, then pausing to take in the moment. In the hush of winter and warmth, the illusion of peace settled like dust. In the hallway, 16-year-old Max adjusted the lens on his camera, capturing the scene for a school documentary titled A House of Memory. It had started as a project about family, about transitions, about change. But lately, it had turned into something else. Something quieter, heavier. His mother looked happy, maybe even whole again. Still, something didn't feel right. A wrong note beneath the harmony. Later that night, Max reviewed the footage on his laptop. As he scrubbed through frames, something flickered past the nursery window. At first he assumed it was wind or shadow. Then he paused the frame, zoomed in, enhanced the light. A man, briefly lit by the soft glow of Grace's night light, stood watching from the dark. Max leaned closer. The high forehead, the scar above the brow, a face he hadn't seen in over 10 years. His father's face. His dead father. Lila had built a world of control. After James died, there had been no other choice. Grief had no manual, but order had comfort. In their suburban Massachusetts home, every item had its place. Vanilla candles untouched on shelves, blankets folded perfectly at corners, silverware nested like clockwork. Predictability became survival. She filled every hour with motion. Early mornings with yoga routines, mid-afternoons with recipe experiments, evenings with endless organizing. When the silence grew too loud, she turned to home projects, repainting a wall, reorganizing the attic, rearranging furniture she didn't need to move. If the house looked flawless, maybe she could convince herself her life still had symmetry. Maybe if things looked right, she wouldn't have to feel how wrong they were. Her first husband had left her a widow at 26. One late summer morning, he took his small motorboat out into the bay, chasing a fog bank that never lifted. They found the wreckage, some splintered wood, an empty fuel canister. Days later, his wedding ring washed ashore tangled in seaweed. The ocean, they said, takes what it wants. There was no funeral, just a memorial service on the lawn with tea candles, photos pinned to trees, Max clinging to her skirt. She remembered the priest's voice catching on the word closure. She hated that word. There was no closure. There was only endurance. Max was 6. He cried for weeks and slept at her side for months. He asked when Dad would come back. He drew pictures of boats with smiling stickmen. Eventually, the house emptied of sobs and filled with silence instead. A year passed. Then 2. Then Daniel. Daniel was everything James wasn't. Measured, meticulous, unwavering. James was charismatic and unpredictable, a man of improvisation and laughter. He could turn a storm into a game, a setback into an adventure. But that charisma came with instability, financial messes, forgotten appointments, schemes that didn't always pan out. Daniel was steady, a man of routines, a calculator with a smile. He was James's closest friend, and in the long months after the accident, he'd become a fixture, bringing groceries, fixing the roof, taking Max for ice cream when Lila couldn't get out of bed. His presence expanded gently until it became permanent. They married 5 years after James's death. The community approved. Lila's parents were relieved. Max, then 11, seemed to accept the change with the quiet resignation of someone who'd learned not to ask for more than what life was willing to give. Now, a decade later, Grace's birth was supposed to be a fresh chapter. Lila was 36. She felt both young and ancient. With Grace, she hoped to relive the wonder she missed the first time, when grief shadowed every bottle and burp. She prepared meticulously, painted the nursery in soft sage and ivory, researched every stroller model and baby monitor brand. She wanted this to be different. She needed it to be. She told herself she was happy. She told herself this house, this husband, this life were built on second chances. But something small and cold, had been gnawing at the edges since the moment Grace opened her eyes. Max wasn't reacting how she imagined. He avoided the baby, barely touched her. He watched more than spoke. His camera, a birthday gift from Daniel, was always nearby. At first, Lila thought it sweet. Maybe he'd become a filmmaker. But then she realized he wasn't filming the baby or the family. He was filming the house, the corners, the windows, the outside. He became increasingly private, locked his bedroom door, stayed up late. His backpack, once carelessly tossed aside, now followed him room to room. He took long walks in the woods behind the house and came back dirt-smeared and distracted. He was always scribbling things in a worn black notebook with frayed corners, angles, timestamps, weather notes. And he asked strange questions during dinner. Quiet ones. Not accusatory, curious, but clinical. Like a scientist dismantling an organism. Do you remember what shirt Dad was wearing the day he disappeared? Lila blinked. Which dad? She asked, startled. Max didn't clarify. He brought up memories she had buried. The sound of the foghorn that morning. James's wallet left on the kitchen counter. How long it took the insurance company to pay out. Whether anyone confirmed the serial number on the wedding band. He questioned details she hadn't thought about in years. How long it took the Coast Guard to arrive. Why no body had ever been found. Why James had gone out on the water alone that day. Whether the GPS tracker on his boat had ever been recovered, or if anyone even looked for it. Lila began to worry. She knew adolescence was strange terrain, especially with a new sibling shifting the family dynamic, but this felt different. It was obsessive, purposeful. She tried asking Daniel if he'd noticed anything. He brushed it off. Max is smart, he said. Let him be curious. He's just processing. We all are. But Lila's instinct told her this wasn't just teenage brooding. It was as if Max was circling something he hadn't quite named, but felt looming behind every wall. Like a dog sniffing for a leak in the foundation. One night, she checked his room after he fell asleep. His laptop was open, the screen dimmed. A video paused, the nursery window. A figure outside. Just a flicker. But there. The hair on Lila's neck rose. She closed the laptop, backed out of the room. In the hallway, she caught her reflection in the glass. For a second, her own face startled her. Not for how it looked, but for what it knew. Somewhere deep inside, she had always suspected something wasn't right. She had spent a decade trying to forget James's face. Now, somehow, it felt like it was following her again. In photos. In dreams. In the shape of her son's cheekbones. She didn't tell Daniel. She told herself it was stress. New baby. Hormones. Maybe even guilt. Because no matter how happy she tried to be, there was always a part of her that wondered, what if James had never gotten on that boat? What if she'd asked him to stay home? The past has its own gravity, and it was pulling her again. The memories returned in flashes, James's scent, like cedar wood and engine grease. His laugh during thunderstorms. The half-built treehouse he left behind. The drawer of letters she never threw away, still hidden in the back of her closet. The old voicemail on her phone that she'd never dared to delete. She tucked Grace into the bassinet and tried to sleep. But even as she drifted off, her mind lingered on Max. On his silence. On the camera always in his hand. On the questions he kept asking. And on a question she hadn't dared ask in 10 years. What if James hadn't died at all? 3 days later, Lila stood in the library, pretending to search for a cookbook while watching Max through the shelves. He was hunched over a microfilm reader, scrolling through old newspapers. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out a random book, keeping her eyes fixed on her son. She hadn't slept well since seeing that paused image on Max's laptop. Each night, she found herself staring at the ceiling, reconstructing old memories, searching for inconsistencies she might have missed. The Coast Guard's perfunctory search. Daniel's swift entry into their lives. The insurance money that arrived with surprising efficiency. The way her parents had encouraged the marriage to Daniel, insisting it was time to move forward. At the time, she'd been too numb to question anything. Grief had made her passive, accepting. But now, watching Max methodically document something, she felt dormant synapses firing. Old instincts resurfacing. Across the library, Max scribbled in his notebook, then took a photo of the screen with his phone. The concentration on his face reminded her so much of James that her chest tightened. She approached carefully, as if approaching a wild animal. School project? She asked, keeping her voice light. Max startled slightly, then minimized the screen. Yeah, for history. What's the assignment? A pause. Local maritime accidents. Lila's heart stuttered. That's specific. Max shrugged, not meeting her eyes. Mr. Peterson said to find something that connects to personal experience. The words hung between them, neither acknowledging their weight. Lila waited, hoping he might volunteer more. But Max remained silent, his hand covering his notebook. "I need to get back to Grace," she finally said. "Daniel's conference call will be ending soon." Max nodded, already turning back to the screen. As she walked away, she felt the vast distance between them, a chasm filled with unspoken questions. Outside, the February sky hung low and heavy. Lila sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel, but didn't start the engine. Instead, she pulled out her phone and opened a browser. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing. Fake death insurance fraud, Massachusetts. Pages of results appeared. She clicked on the first one, scanning quickly. Typical scenarios. Red flags. Investigation protocols. One paragraph caught her attention. In many cases, the surviving spouse is entirely unaware of the fraud, having been convinced of the genuine nature of the loss. She closed the browser, suddenly paranoid about her search history. What would Daniel think if he saw this? What would anyone think? The thought of Daniel sent a new train of connections through her mind. How quickly he'd stepped in after James's death. How he'd handled everything: finances, legal matters, memorial arrangements. How he'd known exactly what to do, whom to call. Almost as if he'd prepared. She pushed the thought away. Daniel had been their friend for years before the accident. Of course he knew how to help. Of course he stepped in. That's what friends did. But another voice, smaller but persistent, reminded her Daniel and James had been business partners once. Something had gone wrong, she never knew exactly what. James had been evasive about it. Just different visions, he'd said. But they'd moved past it. Or so she thought. Lila started the car, her mind churning with half-formed theories. She needed evidence, not suspicions. She needed to see what Max had found. That night, after both Daniel and Max were asleep, Lila slipped into Max's room. His laptop was closed, likely password protected, but his backpack sat against the wall. She opened it silently, feeling a twinge of guilt that dissolved into necessity. Inside was the black notebook. She took it to the hallway, where a small nightlight provided just enough illumination. The first pages contained film notes, camera angles, lighting observations, school project material. But as she continued, the content shifted. Timeline charts. Names she didn't recognize. Locations with coordinates. Weather reports from the day James disappeared. Then, on page 27, something that made her blood freeze, a printed photograph paperclipped to the page. A man in a Seattle cafe, partially obscured by a newspaper. The photo was grainy, enlarged from what was probably a security camera image. But the profile was unmistakable. James. Dated 8 months after his supposed death. Beneath it, Max had written, confirmed by facial recognition software. 94% match. Lila's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the notebook. She flipped through more pages. More photos. James in different locations across years. Vancouver, Phoenix, Denver. Each meticulously dated and annotated with details, what he was wearing, whom he was meeting. The most recent was from just 6 months ago. Then came pages of financial records. Bank transfers. Property purchases under names she didn't recognize. And repeatedly, connections to Daniel. Business entities they'd shared. Transactions too complex for her to follow at first glance. The final pages contained a timeline. Not of James's disappearance, but of what came after. How quickly Daniel had moved in. How efficiently the insurance claim had been processed. How her parents had immediately trusted Daniel with everything, the estate, the finances, her. Max had drawn a large red circle around one entry, $2.3 million transferred to offshore account registered to her father 3 days after funeral. Lila closed the notebook, her mind reeling. It couldn't be true. Her parents wouldn't. Daniel wouldn't. James couldn't have. But the evidence was there. Meticulous. Damning. She returned the notebook exactly as she'd found it and retreated to the nursery. Grace slept peacefully, oblivious to how her mother's world was fracturing. Lila stroked her daughter's cheek, feeling a sudden, fierce protectiveness. If what Max had uncovered was true, her entire life had been built on lies. Her grief, her recovery, her second marriage, all orchestrated by the very people she trusted most. She needed to be certain, and she needed to be careful. Over the next 3 weeks, Lila became a detective in her own life. She created a routine so predictable that no one would question her movements. Yoga at 8 a.m., grocery shopping at 10, baby group at 2. But within that framework, she planted seeds of investigation. She visited the bank where she and James had kept their accounts, claiming to need old tax documents. She reconnected with James's former colleagues, ostensibly to share photos of Grace. She even reached out to the Coast Guard officer who had led the search, now retired, inviting him for coffee to finally achieve some closure. Each conversation yielded fragments. The bank manager mentioned unusual activity just before James's disappearance. A coworker recalled James seeming wired, like he was planning something big in his final weeks. The Coast Guard officer admitted the search had been oddly constrained, like someone upstairs wanted to check boxes, not find answers. Meanwhile, she watched Daniel with new eyes. His meticulous habits now seemed calculating rather than comforting. The way he documented every expense. The weekly calls with her father that always happened in his car. The locked drawer in his office desk. Most revealing was how he tracked her. Casual questions about her day that mapped her movements. The Find My Phone app he insisted they both use for safety. The home security system that logged every door opening and closing. One afternoon, she made an excuse about a forgotten diaper bag and returned home unexpectedly. She found Daniel in Max's room, methodically searching through his drawers. When confronted, he smiled easily. Just looking for that flash drive with our tax software. Thought Max might have borrowed it. Lila nodded, pretending to accept the explanation. But she noticed how his eyes lingered on Max's laptop, how he scanned the room as if cataloging its contents. That night, she whispered to Max as she passed his door, "Meet me tomorrow. Coffee shop on Elm. 11:30. Don't tell anyone." The look they exchanged contained volumes. No surprise. No confusion. Just solemn recognition. They both knew. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide anonymity but quiet enough for conversation. Lila arrived early, choosing a corner table with clear sightlines to all entrances. Max arrived exactly on time, face partially hidden by his hoodie. "I found your notebook," she said without preamble. Max's expression didn't change. "I know. You left it for me to find. You weren't looking until now." No accusation in his voice. Just fact. "How long have you known?" she asked. "I started suspecting 3 years ago. Found an old email account of Dad's that was still active. Still getting messages. Why didn't you tell me?" Max looked down at his untouched coffee. "You were happy. Or I thought you were. And I wasn't sure. Not completely. But now you are. Now I am." Lila took a deep breath. "Tell me everything." Max spoke in a low, steady voice, laying out the conspiracy piece by piece. James had been in financial trouble, investments gone wrong, debts mounting. But he'd also discovered something about Daniel, something involving her father's business. Rather than expose it, they'd made him an offer: disappear, start fresh with new identity and $2 million, or face ruin and possible criminal charges. What did he discover? Lila asked. "I don't know exactly, but it involves property developments, zoning changes, maybe environmental violations. Dead, James, he kept records. That's what they're looking for. They think he left them somewhere in the house. And my parents? They knew." Max nodded slowly. "They helped plan it. The accident. The quick settlement. Your father arranged everything with the insurance company. He had connections. They wanted you taken care of, but they wanted the problem gone more." The betrayal cut so deep that Lila felt physically ill. And Daniel, he was the solution to all their problems. He could manage you, manage the money, keep everything quiet. Plus, he'd always wanted what Dad had. "Including me," Lila whispered. "Especially you." The realization crystallized. She had been the prize in a transaction. Her grief had been a tool for control. Her recovery had been carefully managed to lead her precisely where they wanted her: docile, dependent, deceived. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We need Dad's records. I think I know where they are. But once we have them, we have to be ready to leave. Immediately. They won't let us just walk away with the evidence." "Grace." "They won't hurt Grace," Max assured her. "She's Daniel's biological child. His legacy. It's us they'll want to contain." Lila felt a cold clarity settling over her. The fear was still there, but beneath it was something stronger: rage. Pure, clarifying rage at having been manipulated, at having her grief exploited, at being treated as property to be managed rather than a person to be loved. 2 days, she said. "I need 2 days to prepare." The treehouse stood weather-beaten and abandoned at the edge of their property. James had started building it for Max just months before his disappearance. Daniel had never finished it, claiming it was structurally unsound. Lila stood at its base now, flashlight in hand, while Max kept watch. According to his research, James had visited the hardware store 3 times in the week before he vanished, purchasing items that never appeared in the house renovations. He was preparing, Max had explained, creating a dead drop only we would know about. The ladder creaked under Lila's weight. The small platform above was rotting in places, but still solid enough. By flashlight beam, she examined the half-finished walls. Nothing obvious. She pressed against panels, looking for hidden compartments. Nothing. Then she remembered how James thought. Not in straight lines, but in riddles and jokes and stories. What was the thing he always said about building? The secrets in the foundation. She directed her light to the floor. The plywood panels seemed uniform. But one, just one, was screwed down rather than nailed. She took the screwdriver from her pocket and removed the 4 screws. Beneath was a plastic waterproof container, the kind used for camping. Inside, a USB drive, laminated documents, and a handwritten letter addressed to her. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. James's handwriting, unmistakable. Lila. If you're reading this, then everything went wrong, or maybe right, depending on perspective. I've made terrible choices. Your father offered me a way out when he should have reported me. Daniel offered partnership when he should have walked away. We built something corrupt, and when I wanted to come clean, they decided I was the liability. The evidence on this drive proves environmental fraud across 12 development projects. Soil samples knowingly falsified. Safety reports altered. Your father's company and Daniel's investment firm created shell corporations to hide liability. People have gotten sick. Some have died. All for profit margins. They gave me a choice. Disappear with enough money to start over, or face prison while they walked free. I took the coward's path. I convinced myself it was for you and Max, that you'd be provided for, protected. But that was a lie I told myself. I'm sorry for what this will do to you. To learn that the men you trusted betrayed you. That I betrayed you worst of all. I watch you sometimes, from distances where you can't see me. I've seen you rebuild. You're stronger than any of us deserved. I've left enough evidence to bring them all down. Use it however brings you peace. I loved you. That was never a lie. James. Lila folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her jacket. The USB drive and documents followed. As she climbed down, she felt simultaneously weightless and burdened, free from illusion but heavy with truth. Max waited below, eyes questioning. We have it, she said. We leave tomorrow. That night, Lila moved through the motions of her carefully constructed life for the last time. She made Daniel's favorite dinner. She laughed at his jokes. She nursed Grace and sang her to sleep. She organized the linen closet, straightening already perfect stacks of towels. All while the truth burned inside her. The man across the table had stolen her life. Had watched her grieve for a man who wasn't dead. Had fathered her child while building their relationship on calculated lies. When Daniel asked about her day, she gave practiced answers. When he touched her shoulder as he passed, she didn't flinch. When he kissed her goodnight, she returned the gesture with precisely the affection he expected. And when he finally slept, she slipped from the bed and began executing the plan she and Max had devised. First, she transferred funds from accounts Daniel didn't monitor closely, her hobby account, Grace's college fund that was in her name, the inheritance from her grandmother that had always remained separate from their joint finances. Not enough to raise immediate alarms, but enough to sustain them. Next, the documentation. Passports for her and Max, kept in the fireproof safe. Grace's birth certificate. Insurance cards. She photographed financial statements she couldn't take, uploaded James's evidence to secure cloud storage. In the nursery, she packed only essentials for Grace. 1 favorite blanket. 3 outfits. Formula, diapers, medication. The silver rattle that had been a gift from her sister, Claire, the only family member she still trusted implicitly. For herself, she took almost nothing. A single change of clothes. The photo album from before James's disappearance. Her mother's ring, which she'd stopped wearing when Daniel gave her a replacement. At 4:17 a.m., exactly when the security system performed its daily reboot, she disabled the cameras for what the logs would record as routine maintenance. She sent a pre-written text to Claire, starting early for the lake house. Can't wait to see you. A plausible cover story. They'd been planning this weekend visit for months. Max appeared in the hallway, backpack slung over his shoulder, camera bag across his chest. His laptop case contained not only his computer but copies of all his evidence. They moved silently through the house that had never quite been a home. At the front door, Lila hesitated, looking back at the life she was abandoning. The perfect furniture. The organized shelves. The family photos that documented a fiction more than a reality. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she overreacting? Could there be another explanation? Was she destroying her daughter's stability based on circumstantial evidence? Then she remembered the treehouse. The letter. The absolute certainty in Max's research. The way Daniel searched his room. The calculated affection. The monitoring. The control. She turned away from the house and didn't look back. Claire's apartment was 6 hours away in upstate New York. They drove through dawn in silence, stopping only once to feed Grace and change vehicles, abandoning Lila's SUV for the used Honda Claire had purchased under her own name 2 weeks earlier, following Lila's cryptic request. Claire was waiting when they arrived, her face tight with worry but asking no questions as she helped them inside. Only when they were settled, Grace asleep in a hastily assembled portable crib, did she sit across from Lila and say, "Tell me." So Lila did. Everything. James's fake death. Daniel's orchestration. Her parents' complicity. The environmental crimes. The surveillance. The decade of manipulation. When she finished, Claire was pale but resolute. "I always thought something was off about how quickly Daniel stepped in. How Mom and Dad pushed you toward him. But this." She shook her head. "What do you need from me?" "A place to regroup. Legal help you can trust. And silence. Absolute silence. You have it all. Stay as long as you need." That afternoon, while Claire took Grace for a walk and Max rested, Lila used a burner phone to call the environmental prosecutor whose contact information James had included with his evidence. She identified herself only as someone with information about contaminated development sites in Massachusetts. She arranged a meeting for the following week. By evening, the first text from Daniel arrived on her regular phone. "Where are you?" "Getting worried." She responded as planned. "Sorry for not calling." "At Claire's. Grace got fussy, so we left super early. Service spotty on drive. 3 minutes later. You should have let me know. I was about to call police." Translation: "I've lost control of your movements." She sent back. "Poor reception in mountains. Everything fine. Back Sunday as planned." His response came quickly. "Need to talk to Max about school project." Put him on phone. The first test. She'd anticipated it. "He's hiking with Claire's neighbor's son. Left his phone charging. We'll have him call when back." A pause. Then, "I'll drive up tomorrow. Miss my girls." The escalation, exactly as Max had predicted. Daniel wouldn't wait to re-establish control. "No need. We'll be back so soon. Enjoy your weekend off from baby duty." No response. She could picture him pacing, recalculating, deciding how quickly to move. She turned off the phone. They had perhaps 12 hours before he arrived, having tracked the phone's last location. Plenty of time to be elsewhere. 3 weeks later, Lila sat in a federal prosecutor's office, watching as he reviewed the evidence for the 4th time. Beside her, the environmental prosecutor nodded occasionally, confirming points she had already verified. "This is comprehensive," the federal prosecutor finally said. "Multiple counts of fraud, environmental violations, tax evasion, and the fake death angle that adds another layer of charges." "What about my parents?" Lila asked, her voice steady despite the pain the question caused. "Based on these financial records, they were fully complicit. They'll face charges. And Daniel, he appears to be the linchpin, the one who connected all the parties, orchestrated the cover-up." The prosecutor leaned forward. "We'll need your testimony. You'll have it. But I need guarantees. Protection for me and my children. A new identity after the trial. We can arrange that through witness protection. But it won't be easy. These are powerful people with significant resources. I understand the risks." The prosecutor studied her. "May I ask why you came forward? You could have taken this money and disappeared. Started over somewhere." Lila thought about the question. About the moment she realized her entire life had been curated by others. About the rage that had replaced grief. About Grace, who deserved a mother who stood for something. "Because they took my choices away," she said simply. "I'm taking them back." The indictments came down on a Tuesday morning in early April. Lila watched the news from a safe house in Vermont, Grace sleeping in her arms. 14 people charged, including Daniel, her father, and 3 other executives. The charges ranged from conspiracy to commit fraud to environmental violations resulting in death. James was listed as a fugitive conspirator turned confidential informant, a compromise the prosecutors had arranged. He would testify remotely, avoiding charges in exchange for evidence. Lila had spoken to him once, by secure video call arranged by the FBI. A conversation both surreal and strangely mundane. He looked older, beard now flecked with gray, as carrying a weariness that matched her own. "I never stopped loving you," he'd said. "Love without truth isn't love," she'd responded. "It's just another form of control." He had nodded slowly. "You're different now. I had to be. They would never be together again. Too much damage, too many lies. But they had achieved a fragile peace for Max's sake. A recognition that they had both been manipulated, even as James had made the unforgivable choice to abandon his family rather than face consequences. Now, watching Daniel's expressionless face on the news as federal agents led him from his office in handcuffs, Lila felt no triumph. Only a quiet certainty that she was finally steering her own course. Max entered the room, camera in hand as always. But he wasn't filming evidence anymore. He was documenting their journey, their resurrection. They're saying it might be the biggest environmental fraud case in state history, he said, sitting beside her. Your father would be proud of what you uncovered. Max was quiet for a moment. Which one? Lila considered. Both, in different ways. James for your persistence. Daniel for your attention to detail. She smiled sadly. We can acknowledge the gifts without forgiving the givers. Grace stirred in her arms, eyes blinking open to a world that would be more complicated than Lila had ever imagined for her daughter. But also more honest. More authentic. What happens after the trial? Max asked. Lila looked out the window at the mountains beyond. Spring was coming, the first hints of green emerging from winter's grip. She thought about the new identities waiting for them. The chance to define themselves by choice rather than circumstance. We built something true, she said. A real house of memory. Not perfect. Not controlled. Just ours. Outside, the first birds of spring called to each other across the awakening forest. Signals of survival. Of endurance. Of life continuing, with all its messy, beautiful truth.